أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري فداه أرواح العالمين. Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The period of occultation, the time when the bulk of the Shia have no access to their divinely appointed leader, to the Imam of our time, is by far, without a shadow of doubt, one of the most difficult tests and trials that we have ever been subjected to. Not having direct access to the Imam is a source of tribulation and pain and much confusion for so many people, and has been for almost 1,000 years. And so one of the questions that I'm sure you've thought about or you've heard others raise is, how can we meet the Imam? How can we see the Imam? And to answer that question, let me start with a little introduction. And the introduction involves painting a picture of what happened and what steps were required to fill the leadership void after the absence of the Imam. Many of you know that after the Imam went into occultation at the tender age of 5, there were 4 individuals who, one after the other, and in succession, became the Imam's deputies or emissaries or representatives while he was in the so-called lesser occultation. The lesser occultation, this is a bit of a history lesson, but I think it's critical that you pay attention, inshallah, because there are some lessons here. The lesser occultation began with the passing of Imam al-Hasan al-Askari, God's peace and blessings be upon him, when Imam Zaman was only 5 years old. The first deputy, the first emissary was Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri. And Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri, while we can, I believe, dedicate an entire lecture or even more to the life and legacy of each of these deputies, I will very briefly go through highlights of their lives, if you like. Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri was also known as Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Zaman. And the reason he was given the title of Zaman is, Zaman stems from the Arabic word samn. Samn means oil, because he was a merchant of oil, cooking oil, that is. He would buy and sell. In other words, he was, at least from the perspective of an outsider, he was a regular person who had a shop and worked for a living, when in fact his real job was to connect the Shia to the Imam of their time. Which means that you can be an oil merchant, you can be a seller of soap, you can be a business person of all strides and types and whatnot, but you can also attain the highest level of Iman, the highest level of faith by connecting to the Imam of your time, brothers and sisters. your job, your occupation, as long as you don't engage in anything that's illicit, anything that is immoral, anything that is not sanctioned by our faith and our religion, is irrelevant. When it comes to your spiritual connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you can achieve that no matter where you are, as long as what you're engaged in is not haram. So Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri, one thing you need to know about him is that he was the recipient of the seal of approval of 3 different Imams. From the age of 11 and during the reign of Imam Ali al-Hadi alayhi salam, Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri al-Zaman was a companion of the Ahlulbayt. He was approved by the Imam. Given his loyalty, his piety, the clean slate that he maintained, the avoidance of any and all sins, no matter how small, made him close to the court of Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam. And he was appointed as a deputy of Imam al-Hadi, and then Imam al-Hasan al-Askari. He himself was born in Samarra, which is why one of his titles is Al-Askari, because he was born there, and Samarra was a military fortress, and therefore it was called Askari, meaning it came from Askar. And Imam al-Hasan al-Askari says about him, Al-Amriyu wabnuhu thiqatan. Listen to this hadith, because there are people out there trying to cast doubt about the integrity of these emissaries and deputies of Imam al-Zaman, these 4 sufara as we call them. And if anyone ever tries to tarnish their integrity or their reputation, try and remember these. Imam al-Askari says, Al-Amriyu wabnuhu thiqatan, meaning Uthman ibn Sa'id and his son Muhammad ibn Uthman, who became the 2nd deputy. He says that these 2 are thiqatan, فَمَا يُؤَدِّيَانِ لَكَ عَنِّي يُؤَدِّيَانِ وَمَا يَنْقُلَانِ فَعَنِّي يَنْقُلَانِ. In other words, they have the highest level of integrity. They are reliable individuals. So whatever they tell you, they're telling you directly from me. Whatever they convey to you, they convey from me. Imam al-Hasan al-Askari gave them this medal of honor and showed us that these 2 are reliable individuals who could be trusted. Not just trusted individuals in general, people that you can generally take as trustworthy. He says whatever they say, they're quoting me. Whatever they convey, they're conveying from me, which means that they have attained the highest level of reliability. Which means that if they convey a hadith, it is 100% authentic. Keep this in mind. After Uthman ibn Sa'id, his son Muhammad ibn Uthman became the deputy of Imam al-Zaman, the number 2 deputy. Uthman ibn Sa'id was the deputy for 5 years. When his son became the Safir, he was the deputy for 40 years. 40 years. In other words, how great a person do you have to be? What kind of piety must you maintain for you to remain the personal deputy of the Imam of your time for a period of 40 years? It's mind-boggling, brothers and sisters. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, Muhammad ibn Uthman had also received the seal of approval and the medal of honor from Imam al-Hasan al-Askari, which means that if Uthman ibn Sa'id appoints someone, we must take his word and accept him as the emissary of Imam al-Zaman. When Muhammad ibn Uthman appoints his successor, whose name was Muhammad ibn Ruh or Muhammad ibn Rawh, we also take him as reliable, and we take him as the one appointed by Imam al-Zaman, because his predecessor, Muhammad ibn Uthman, was taken as reliable. And then of course the last emissary, the fourth emissary was As-Samari. And As-Samari, eventually before he died, he received a letter, what we call in our religious etymology and religious jargon, we call it tawqi'. In other words, a signature, a signed letter which came from an-nahiya al-muqaddasa, the sacred corner, the sacred location. Meaning these were coded words to describe a message that had arrived from Imam al-Zaman. As-Samari, who was the fourth and final emissary, receives a letter from Imam al-Zaman in which the Imam told him, you will die in a week's time. Pack your bags, get ready, finish your affairs because you're about to die, and do not appoint anyone after you. Then the Imam said something which is key to the problems that we're going through in this day and age, brothers and sisters. Listen carefully to this. The Imam said to him, وَمَنِ ادَّعَى الرُّؤْيَةَ فَكَذِّبُوهُ. And if after you anyone claims to be the deputy of Imam al-Zaman, then you should all accuse them of being liars and imposters. Which is why after As-Samari or As-Sumari, and after the end of the lesser occultation and the beginning of the greater occultation, which has lasted 70 years after the passing of Imam al-Hasan al-Askari to this day, right? Over 1,000 years. In this period, in this era, if anybody ever claims to you that there is a person out there somewhere who represents Imam al-Zaman, your first reaction will be, liar, get out of my face. No other way to sugarcoat it. There's no ifs or buts about it. If someone says that I represent Imam al-Zaman, or that I am in constant contact with Imam al-Zaman, or that I convey messages from Imam al-Zaman, you tell them you're a liar, you're an imposter, get out of my face. Why? Because Imam al-Zaman himself says so. Does that mean that no one has access to the Imam? No, it doesn't. Does it mean that no one gets to meet the Imam? No, it doesn't. In fact, we have reliable reports that a lot of ulama have in fact met the Imam and have spoken to the Imam, although there is two key differences. The first difference between what the Imam says you should accuse the other of being an imposter and a liar, and the reports that we receive from our scholars, the difference is, number one, when our scholars mention to others that they have met the Imam, they usually add a legal caveat to that statement. They say that you shouldn't tell anyone until after I'm dead. Meaning that they don't want to take advantage of the fact that they have had the honor and the privilege of a personal audience with Imam al-Zaman to endear people to themselves, to gain greater popularity, so that people respect them having met the Imam. Usually they say, you are not allowed to tell this to anyone until after I die. Number two difference, and this is key, is that when scholars claim, or when we hear stories of the scholars having met the Imam, it does not mean in any way that they represent the Imam in a specific sense. It doesn't mean that they speak on behalf of the Imam. What these scholars represent to us is reputable, respectable jurists of the faith who dedicate and devote their entire lives to learning about the teachings of the Quran and the Ahlulbayt in order to make deductions out of them, in order to give us teachings as per their best efforts and best understandings of religious scripture. There's a big difference between this and someone saying that whatever I tell you, I say so on behalf of Imam al-Zaman, which would be the gospel truth, so to speak. Big difference between the two. So the Imam tells As-Sumari that after you die, if anybody claims to represent me, they are liars. The reason I'm saying all of this is because right now we have people who claim to be representatives of Imam al-Zaman. If you go to a place in London, there's a big park in central London called Hyde Park. Has anybody heard of it? Big, beautiful park. I've been there many times. There's a tiny corner in that park that's called Speaker's Corner. And Speaker's Corner is a place where people go to have debates, right? It's named Speakers because people go there, they give speeches, they stand on a soapbox, they give lectures, and then they have debates. Oftentimes, they tend to become quite heated debates. But what's interesting is that if you do ever go there, you'll find the most bizarre things you've ever seen in your life. You will see some idiot claiming he's God, another loser claiming to be Jesus, some other woman saying she's Mary. And so you have all kinds of different people, a bunch of crazies most of the time, but you also have, pretty logical, interesting discussions and debates happening as well. So my point is, there's always going to be people out there who make all kinds of strange and unacceptable and blatantly irrational claims, right? From being God to being a prophet to being a prophetess, right? My brother once met a woman, I believe here in Auckland, New Zealand, if I'm not mistaken, who introduced herself as a prophetess, which I didn't even know was a word until I heard that. Right? So she's a prophet of God. She receives revelation from God. Point is, all kinds of crazy people make all kinds of crazy claims. And one of those is to make the claim that they represent Imam al-Zaman. And there are people like that in Iraq, people like that in Iran and elsewhere. My point is this: مَنِ ادَّعَ الرُّؤْيَةَ, say it with me, فَكَذِّبُوهُ, tell them you're a liar, you're an imposter. You do not represent Imam al-Zaman. Nobody, in fact, represents Imam al-Zaman. If you're a scholar, then prove your worth. If you're a jurist, if you're a mujtahid, a faqih, then go right inside the ring and prove that you're a scholar, prove your credentials and your qualifications, and try and get the recognition that all scholars get when they study in the Hawza. Now, the second emissary whom I mentioned, what was his name again? Muhammad ibn Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri. He was also known as Abu Ja'far. One day, a man goes to him. He says to him, Ya Aba Ja'far, هل لي إلى مولاي من سبيل فقد اشتقت إليه. Is there any way I can meet my master? Is there any way I can have an audience with him? Could my eyes rest with the luminous face of the Imam of my time? Is it possible for me to do this? فَقَدْ اشْتَقْتُ إِلَيْهِ, for I am eager, I am yearning, I am dying to see him. Uthman ibn Sa'id, remember we established that whatever he says, he's quoting the Imam himself. And he doesn't say anything from himself. In other words, he's a reliable, authentic narrator of hadith, who was also in contact with the Imam. That's another critical point before I mention his response. Another critical point was that I was listening to somebody just the other day. Some guy, unfortunately, he also wears a turban, claims to be a marja, but he's casting doubt about almost every pillar of the school of Ahlulbayt. One of them is that these four emissaries, how did they have access to the Imam? How do we know they were telling the truth? This kind of thing. And so, this is why I'm mentioning these points. The Shia were never naive people. You, all of us, we're not naive. Yes, you have Shia who probably have a lesser inclination towards learning the truth. People who are less interested, perhaps, in finding out what the truth actually is. But in general, the Shia were not naive, simplistic idiots. They were people who often challenge what is being presented to them, and that's a good thing, right? You should demand evidence. I've always said that even when you have a speaker, as respectable as they may be, if they say something that doesn't quite sit right with your mainstream beliefs and the mainstream Shia faith, you should challenge them. And I'm not saying be disrespectful. I'm saying ask them for evidence. Ask them, tell them, where do we find this in the Quran? Where do we find this in the traditions of the Ahlulbayt? So the Shia were never naive people. In fact, when Imam al-Hasan al-Askari alayhi salam passed away, we have many incidents like this, but I'll mention one. When Imam al-Hasan al-Askari passed away, a delegation came from Qum, Wafdul Qummiyin. This delegation came to Samarra, and they were on a mission to find who the next Imam was. So they came, and the person who had taken the position of Imama after Imam al-Hasan al-Askari was Ja'far ibn Ali al-Hadi, who was Imam al-Hasan al-Askari's brother. Some people have called him Ja'far al-Kadhab, even though he was the son of an Imam, the brother of an Imam, the uncle of an Imam, but he has been given the title of the lying Ja'far because he claimed to be the Imam following his brother's passing. So they came to him, he said, I'm the Imam after my brother. They said, okay, no offense, no disrespect, but your brother used to be able to tell us about the unseen world. Meaning that we now have in our possession a specific amount of money and letters from the Shia in Qum addressed to the Imam. If you are truly the Imam, then tell us how much money we have and how many letters we have and from whom are those letters. Ja'far obviously didn't have access to this kind of knowledge of the unseen, and so he said, no, that's not true, you're lying about my brother having knowledge of the unseen. Then he reported them to the authorities. He said to the Abbasid Caliph at the time, you should arrest these people because they're lying about my brother having knowledge of the unseen. So the Shia were never naive people. When it came to determining who the Imam was or who spoke for the Imam, they did what we now call what? Due diligence. Due diligence means you do your research. You find out. You don't just give in because someone told you something. Anyway, so when it came to these emissaries, they had to prove themselves. It wasn't like one day Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri, a Zaman, some oil merchant, claims to be the representative of the Imam and everyone believes him. They had to prove their reliability, their authenticity. They even performed miracles. Even miracles. One day, Al-Sumari, who was the fourth emissary, was sitting down with some of his companions when all of a sudden he said, لَقَدْ مَاتَ Ibn Babawayh al-Qummi. Right now, Ibn Babawayh al-Qummi has passed away. Remember that As-Sumari was in Baghdad. Ibn Babawayh al-Qummi, we mentioned him the other night. He's the father of Shaykh al-Saduq. He's the one who prayed and asked Imam al-Zaman for children who would be good and righteous, and the Imam prayed for him. He lived in Qum. So between Qum and Baghdad, there's quite a distance back in the day. There was no instant messaging where you could tell someone that something like that had happened. He said that Ibn Babawayh al-Qummi just died. His companions said, you know what, that's a bold claim, we need to test it out. So what they did was, they said, فَضَبَطْنَا الْيَوْمَ وَالشَّهْرِ. We made a notation as to the exact hour and day and month when he claimed that Ibn Babawayh al-Qummi, who was a great scholar, has just passed away. A week after that, news arrived from Qum that Ibn Babawayh al-Qummi had died at this hour, on this day, in this month. So they verified it, and it turns out that he died at the exact moment when As-Sumari had told him that he had died. In other words, these scholars, these emissaries, these deputies of Imam al-Zaman were subjected to rigorous testing. Right? They had to prove that they were the real deal. Anyway, Abu Ja'far, Muhammad ibn Uthman ibn Sa'id al-Amri, the second emissary, is approached by that man. His name was Abu Abdullah. Abu Abdullah said to him, I would love to meet my Imam. Is there any way? Is there any access? Can you give me an address? And sometimes we all feel that way, right? Especially when we see the suffering that's happening around the world. When the followers of the Ahlulbayt are subjected to persecution, to death, to carnage, to murder, whether it be in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, wherever it is, you tend to reach deep down and ultimately think, well, we have a master, we have an Imam. How can we see him? How can we access him? And that's a good thing, as evidenced by this hadith. Because Abu Ja'far, Muhammad ibn Uthman, says to him, he says, do you really yearn to meet your Imam? He said, yes, I do, by God. He said, Jazakallahu khayran. May Allah bless you and reward you for the desire to meet the Imam of your time. However, لا تلتمسن رؤيته ولا تطلبن الاجتماع به. Do not insist on meeting him in person. ولكن زره. Instead of trying to meet him in person, perform his ziyarah, perform his visitation. Send your peace and salutations upon him in his absence. Don't insist on meeting him. But why? Why should we not insist on meeting the Imam? There's a number of reasons. I don't know if we have time to mention all of them. I'll mention one or two. We have a hadith that says when the Imam reappears, he will go initially, he'll begin his mission in Mecca. He will then go to Jerusalem, where Jesus will join him and pray behind him. And this is a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, by the way. Not in Shia sources, but in Sunni sources. Where Prophet Isa alayhi salam will perform Salat al-Jama'ah behind Imam al-Mahdi ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu al-Sharif. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. It is Thursday night and we're talking about the Imam. How about a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. To ask Allah to hasten his reappearance, a louder salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. After Jerusalem, the next stop is in Kufa. The hadith says, when he comes to Kufa, he will be confronted by a large crowd. Another hadith actually puts a number to it, 10,000 people who will come before the Imam, and they will say to him, La hajata lana libani Fatima, ud min haythu atayt. Go back to where you came from. We don't need you or the children of Fatima to come and preach to us, to come and tell us what to do and what not to do. Now what's interesting about this is that we're not talking about Mecca, we're not talking about Medina, we're not talking about Paris, we're not talking about Jerusalem, we're talking about Kufa. Kufa that's made up of what? It's made up of the followers of the Ahlulbayt. 100% Shia, right? And when 10,000 people approach the Imam and say to him, go back to where you came from, what does that tell us? It tells us this, brothers and sisters, listen carefully. Prophets always came, and part of their problem with the people that they were sent to, every prophet that was sent to his people, part of their problem was what? Being rejected by the people. But why? Why do you think people rejected their prophets? Because prophets challenged conventional wisdom. I will use discretion in the next few minutes when I talk about this. I want you to do the math. I want you to connect the dots. Prophets challenged conventional wisdom. Prophets challenged social norms. In other words, the problem that every prophet had was that he came to preach something that was completely diametrically opposed to how people were living their lives. For example, in the time of our prophet, the prophet of mercy, when he came, it was a conventional wisdom, part of conventional wisdom and a social norm, that fathers would bury their daughters alive because daughters were seen as a burden, because daughters were seen as a source of shame. If they were ever captured by an enemy force, they would be enslaved, and so they brought shame to the family, because daughters wouldn't work and therefore they represented a financial burden on the family. And so the fathers thought, you know what, let's just get rid of them. Let's get rid of them. Not all of them, mind you. Not everyone practiced this, because otherwise you wouldn't have mothers, you wouldn't have children coming into this world. So there was a group of people that practiced infanticide, but the entire society accepted it. That's why it was a social norm. While not everyone practiced it, everyone accepted it. Everyone thought this was perfectly fine. Everyone justified it. Everyone said, well, that's their lifestyle. Who am I to judge? Love is love is love. Everyone said, well, this is perfectly fine. I mean, if they want to do that, who am I? You see what I'm trying to say? Social norms were challenged by their prophets. That's why people rejected them. That's why people felt that the prophets were too difficult to digest. Their messages were too difficult to digest. And so they rejected those prophets. Which is why when Imam al-Zaman comes, the Shia in Kufa, we're not even talking about every other place, where the Hawza of Najaf is, where Amir al-Mu'mineen is, where Kumail is, where Maytham is, where all these great sanctuaries are, the Shia of Kufa will reject Imam al-Zaman. What does that tell you about where we're headed, about where we're going? It tells you that it's a very tough test that's coming up, brothers and sisters. Which is why Muhammad ibn Uthman, Abu Ja'far, says to Abu Abdullah, he says to him, listen, don't insist on meeting him. Because when you meet him, perhaps part of the reason, he doesn't spell this out, but part of the reason is, when you meet the Imam, that is the end of the conversation. If the Imam personally told you that, for example, such and such act in Islam is haram, and you reject it, you become a kafir. At least when you're being told that this act is haram through a scholar, through a speaker, through Mahdi Modarresi or anybody else, at the very least, there is some cushion there, right? There is some cushion that, hey, Mahdi Modarresi himself is all over the place. Who is he to tell us this? You know? Maybe he didn't quite understand what the hadith is trying to say. Maybe the hadith is not authentic. All these excuses that we make up, right? Oh, what about the authenticity of this hadith? All these excuses that you hear, they provide a level of cushion, for better or for worse. At the very least, we can make up those excuses, but if the Imam himself told you that your lifestyle is evil, immoral, unacceptable, illicit, and you still choose to go against him, what does that make us? So he says to him, instead of insisting on meeting the Imam in person, do his ziyarah. Send your salams to the Imam. Read Ziyarat al-Yasin. Read Dua al-Ahad. Read Dua al-Nudba. Read Dua al-Samat. Read all of the Dua al-Iftitah. By the way, almost all these supplications have been narrated by the 4 deputies of Imam al-Zaman. Dua al-Iftitah that you recite in the month of Ramadan is narrated by the deputies of the Imam, from the Imam, as well as Dua Nudba and others. Do his ziyarah, because the process of ziyarah, the process of remembering Imam al-Zaman, the process of trying to connect with Imam al-Zaman solidifies that faith, so that when he does arrive, we don't tell him to go back where he came from. And that's critical, brothers and sisters. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, "Inna lana dawlatan taji'u idha sha Allah." We will get a chance to rule this world. The Imams of the Ahlulbayt will get a chance to give the world, to give humanity a glimpse of divine justice and compassion and kindness one day. When God allows that to happen, it will happen. Just wait. Then the Imam says, so if you wish to be accepted and to be taken as true followers of this path, then you should do this. فَلْيَنْتَظِرْ وَلْيَعْمَلْ بِالْوَرَعِ وَمَحَاسِنِ الْأَخْلَاقِ وَهُوَ مُنْتَظِرْ. Listen to this statement, examine it carefully. The Imam says, first of all, you should wait in anticipation of the Imam's return. Actively wait for him to come back. Then the Imam says, وَلْيَعْمَلْ بِالْوَرَعِ. You should guard yourself against sin. Avoid any and all sins, because every single sin, brothers and sisters, is an erroneous social norm, is another arrow in your heart that might push you off the edge, God forbid, into the group of people that says to Imam al-Zaman, go back to where you came from. Imagine, just think of sins like that. That every sin could potentially push you into that camp. That despite believing in him, despite saying we're waiting for him, what if he comes back and we tell him, you know what, I'm better off without you. I want to live this way that I've been living all this time. I don't want to change anything. That's why I said the other night, brothers and sisters, we're just not ready. We're not ready. They say they came to a alim and they told him, what if you find out that in a week's time you're going to die? What will you do? Like what are you going to change about the way you go about your life and whatnot? He said, I will do exactly what I've been doing for the last 40 years. I'll still go to class. I'll still look after my family. I'll still do this. I won't change a thing. Because I've been preparing for this day for 40 years. I don't have to change anything in the last week of my life. If we're told that Imam Zaman is coming tomorrow, would we have to make any changes and adjustments? If we do, then we're not ready. If we do, then there's something wrong. If we do, we're not doing what Imam al-Sadiq says we should be doing, which is to wait. Wait means getting ready. It's like when somebody says to you, you have to, in order to fly, in order to board an aircraft, you have to be at the airport 3 hours prior to departure. What you do at the airport is literally nothing but wait. Once you get there, you check in, you go to the lounge or to the terminal or whatever, you wait there for the next 2 hours. But that waiting is very different from the 2 hours of waiting you might do at home. Because if you wait it out at home, you're going to miss your flight. But if you wait at the airport, having prepared everything and having checked in and having done everything you're supposed to do, you're going to definitely board the flight at the end of the day. If the flight is delayed by 2 hours, that's fine. You wait a little longer, but eventually you'll board it. By waiting for Imam al-Zaman, we're talking about preparing for him, then waiting for him. Not waiting at home, not waiting in the sense that, oh, one day it's going to happen. So then Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam says, you have to wait, guard yourself against sin, apply moral lessons in your life. وَلْيَعْمَلْ بِمَحَاسِنِ الْأَخْلَاقِ. Present yourself to your, first and foremost, to your family, to your parents, to your siblings, to your children, to your husband, to your spouse, as well as the larger community and society around you, in the most impeccable manner, with the highest akhlaq. وَهُوَ مُنْتَظِرٌ. While you still wait. In other words, Imam al-Sadiq mentions intidhar twice in one sentence, before and after. So there's an emphasis on waiting and anticipating. Then he says, if you do this, and you die before the Imam comes, كَانَ لَهُ كَأَجْرِ مَنْ أَدْرَكَهُ. You will get the same reward as those who waited until the Imam came and they joined him. Then the Imam says, فَهَنِيئًا لَكُمْ أَيَّتُهَا الْعَصَابَةُ الْمَرْحُومَةُ. Bless you, O group that has received the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's enshrouded by the compassion of God. Because if you apply these teachings, then you receive God's blessing. Now, this means, brothers and sisters, waiting in anticipation, being vigilant at all times. A classic example that I always cite, because I've been through this a couple of times, is when you go to the train station and you're waiting. I don't know if you have trains here, but you go to the train station and you're waiting there for like, say 20 minutes, for example. Then suddenly you get a phone call at the last minute. You pick up the phone, you're talking to someone, the train comes and goes and you miss it. And then that's another hour of waiting for the next train. You don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be that person who's waiting and waiting, but then because of one distraction, because of one sin, because of one relationship, because of one problem, one fire that we light between us and our parents or our siblings or the people around us, God forbid, we might be distracted and miss the train. You don't want to miss that train. Not that train. Ibn Sa'd, who's a Sunni scholar, he has a book called Tabaqat ibn Sa'd. This book is about the lives of the companions in various levels. The companions of the Prophet, then the companions of the companions, and so on and so forth. He narrates the story, a man by the name of Al-Uryan. He says that my father and I used to go out to the desert all the time for hunting and leisure and what have you. Kunna nabtadi, which means to go to Bayda, meaning to the desert. He says that we used to go to the area where later on the Battle of Karbala took place. And while we were there, again, the Battle of Karbala had not happened yet, But he says, we used to go to this area, and there was always a man from Bani Asad there. So my father said to him one day, how come every time we come here we see you? He said, well, I've heard that one day Ibn Bint Rasulullah will fight on this land and will be killed. I come here often so that maybe I could also join him. Now that's a person who's in preparation. That's a man who's in anticipation. He says, so this happened over a period of a few years. And one day, my father and I were back in Kufa, I believe they were from Kufa. He says, and we heard that the Battle of Karbala had taken place and that Imam al-Hussein had been killed. So my father said, hurry, let's go and find out if we can see this man, al-Asadi, the man from the tribe of Bani Asad. He said, so we rushed over there. We saw bodies scattered across the plains. We saw severed limbs. We saw the massacre of Karbala and its aftermath. And eventually, after looking for the body, we eventually found the Asadi, the man from Bani Asad, among those who had been killed for the sake of Imam al-Hussein. Now that's anticipation. Nusrati mu'addatun lakum, we say in Ziyarat Abil Fadl al-Abbas alayhi salam. You talk about Abil Fadl al-Abbas, you talk about his loyalty to Imam al-Hussein, you talk about how he exerted every last iota of effort in his body for the sake of Hussein and the children of Hussein. You talk about all of this, then you say, وَنُصْرَتِي مُعَدَّةٌ لَكُمْ. I am also here. And I am telling you, I am here to proclaim that my support, my loyalty is there for you when the time comes. You don't have to do anything now other than be pious, other than avoid sins, other than help others find the way. Others find the light of the Ahlulbayt. Help the other Shia be saved from the doubts and misconceptions that they're being bombarded with, especially young brothers and sisters who today are the target of so many people trying to take their religion and their faith and their beliefs away from them. You should try all of this. Maintain your faith and the faith of your family and those around you. That's all you have to do. And then when the time comes, when the moment comes, when you hear the words of Imam Zaman, when you hear him asking for support, you'll be more than ready. Because you've been waiting for this moment all your life. They say that a man was dying, his wife was right next to him in his bedside at the hospital, and she was crying. All of a sudden he looked at her and he's like, why are you crying? She said, well, why would I not cry? My husband, my dear sweetheart, he's going to go and leave me alone. He said, well, you can cry if you want, but I've been crying for this moment all my life. The reason I'm not crying is because I've cried and I've prepared myself, and here I am. An uncle of mine passed away a couple of years ago. When he was told that he had terminal cancer and that he only had like 2 or 3 months to live, he's an uncle from my mother's side. Rahmatullah alayhi, Sayyid Muhammad Rida al-Qazwini. When he was told that he was going to die, suddenly he started making phone calls to his daughters and his sons and his family members, cracking jokes over the phone. My brother was with him. He was the only one with him in hospital, in fact. He says that it was really weird how happy and joyous he was. He goes, so one of his daughters said to him, Dad, what are you doing cracking jokes and telling us that you're going to die in a couple of months at the same time? Are you okay? He's like, sweetheart, I can't wait to meet my master, Amirul Mu'mineen. I've been longing for this day all my life. All my life I've been reading stories and hadiths and traditions where Amirul Mu'mineen says to Harith al-Hamdani, Ya Hara Hamdan, man yamut yarani. Don't worry, when you die, I'll be there for you. I will look after you. I will tell the angel of death to show mercy to you. I've been waiting for this day all my life. Of course I'm happy. I will get to see the face of my master, Amirul Mu'mineen. Sallallahu alayhi ya Amirul Mu'mineen. Tomorrow is the night of the strike on the head of the Mawla. Anyway, I didn't want to go here. My point is this, that people who have prepared all their lives, they'll be happy the moment it is time for them to meet their Mawla, to meet their master. One of the reasons why we dread death so much and why it scares us and why an entire industry is made around horror films is because we're not ready. We're not prepared. If we were ready, it's a completely different story. Anyway, the point I want to mention is this, brothers and sisters. Imam Zaman, meeting him is a privilege. It's an honor, without a doubt. But perhaps we're better off connecting with him. Whether we get to see him or not is something that's up to him. He will get to decide who eventually has the privilege of setting their eyes on the beautiful, luminous face of God's representative on earth. That's entirely up to him. And he himself says, if you want that kind of access, وَلَوْ أَنَّ أَشْيَاعَنَا وَفَّقَهُمُ اللَّهُ لِطَاعَتِهِ. He says these in a letter addressed to Shaykh al-Mufid. What's the difference between me and Shaykh al-Mufid, brothers and sisters? It's obvious. Why is it that when Imam Zaman speaks to Shaykh al-Mufid, this is how he speaks to him? He says to him, إِلَى الْأَخِ الرَّشِيدِ وَالشَّيْخِ الْمُفِيدِ. Imam Zaman addresses Shaykh al-Mufid as my dear brother. How is it that Shaykh al-Mufid has that kind of relationship with Imam Zaman, and I am as far away from the teachings and ideals of the Imam as anyone could be? The answer is simple. It's not rocket science. The Imam himself says, وَلَوْ أَنَّ أَشْيَاعَنَا وَفَّقَهُمُ اللَّهُ لِطَاعَتِهِ. If only our followers, the people who claim to be our partisans, if they upheld the covenant that they have with us, the promise that they've made to us. When you called yourself a Shia, you're making an implicit promise that I will follow your teachings, I will follow your lead, I will walk in your footsteps. You make this promise to Rasulullah, you make this promise to Amir al-Mu'mineen, you make this promise to Fatima al-Zahra, you make this promise to Imam al-Zaman. If you only upheld this, and it's not hard, brothers and sisters, it's not. Wallahi, as one of my teachers used to say, Rahmatullah alayhi ayatullah, Shaykh Baqir Alam al-Huda, he used to say that if you think about it, the first step in the path to righteousness is the hardest step. The first one is the hardest. You know those times when, for example, a sister who doesn't wear hijab, when she decides to actually put on the hijab and she tells her family that I want to put on the hijab, that is by far the most difficult step. After that it gets easier and easier and easier because you get divine support. The first time you say, I want to go to Hajj, I want to go to Ziyarah, I want to get married, I want to do the right thing, the first step is always the hardest. After that, God steps in. عَلَى قَدْرِ النِّيَّةِ تَكُونُ مِنَ اللَّهِ الْعَطِيَّةِ. God's backing and support of a believer is in proportion to the intention that they have, the willpower that they have. You make a solid intention, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come through to you. He'll support you, He'll back you. وَمَنْ يَتَّقِ اللَّهِ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. Inna Allah, subhanallah, this verse is incredible in Surah Al-Talaq. Allah says if you show piety, God will provide for you. يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا. He will find a way out for you. وَيَرْزُقْهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ. And He will provide for you from sources you didn't expect. Suddenly it works out. Suddenly it happens. It's like when you say, I want to go to Ziyarah, but you don't have money, you don't have a passport, you don't have connections, you don't have anyone going with you. Suddenly things fall into place. Suddenly things happen without you even anticipating it. Subhanallah. My point is this, brothers and sisters. Imam al-Zaman wants one thing from you and I, and that is to follow in his footsteps, to ensure that we don't add to his misery. Just think about this. Imam al-Zaman's entire legacy and history is one of death and carnage. Every single one of his ancestors was hunted down and murdered. From Rasulullah all the way to his father, Imam al-Hasan al-Askari. When he thinks of his parents and ancestors, all he sees is death. All he sees is assassinations. All he sees is betrayals. And above all is the greatest tragedy of all, and that is of Aba Abdullah al-Husayn وَلَأَنْدُبَنَّكَ صَبَاحًا وَمَسَاءً. I will remember you, O my grandfather, every morning and every night. وَلَأَبْكِيَنَّ عَلَيْكَ بَدَلَ الدُّمُوعِ دَمًا. And I will cry for you until my tears dry up and I start to shed fresh blood out of my eyes. This is what he sees when he looks at his past and his history. And then he looks at the present day. He looks at this world today. And he sees his followers, he sees his children, he sees these people that proclaim his loyalty and his fellowship being subjected to suffering and dying and whatnot. All this suffering, all this pain, all this misery, let's make sure you and I don't add to it with our sins. That's all God wants from us vis-a-vis Imam al-Zaman. Let's not add to the pain of having to look at my report card every Tuesday night and every Thursday night and seeing sin after sin after sin after transgression. Inshallah. But at the end of the day, Imam al-Zaman is more merciful and more kind and compassionate than to abandon us. I'll mention this story and wrap up, inshallah. As-Sayyid ibn Tawus, rahmatullah alayhi, a great scholar and someone who had met Imam al-Zaman on multiple occasions and could even make out the tone of the Imam's voice. Even if he didn't see him, at times he would hear the Imam's voice in certain places and locations. He says that one day I went to the cellar in Samarra, what's called Sardab al-Ghayba, where Imam al-Zaman went into occultation. It was essentially the Imam's home, his ancestral, his parental home. And it's where people go to ziyarah. He says, I went there, and as I was doing my ziyarah, it was a Thursday night, much like this one. It was a time of reflection. Suddenly I heard the voice of the Imam, and these were his words. He says, Allahumma arham shi'atana. Oh Allah, bless and show mercy to our followers. فَإِنَّهُمْ خُلِقُوا مِنْ فَاضِلِ طِينَتِنَا. Because they were created from the remnant of the clay that was used to create us. In other words, they belong to us. They are like our children. فإنهم خلقوا من فاضل طينتنا وعجنوا بماء ولايتنا فإن خفت موازينهم. Oh Allah, if you look at their deeds and their actions, and there seems to be shortcomings there, if it seems they don't have enough deeds to cover their misdeeds, if it seems that they don't have enough good actions to show to you, فقلل من حسن فخذ من حسناتنا وَاجْعَلْهَا فِي حَسَنَاتِهِمْ. Oh Allah, take from my actions, take from my good deeds, and add to the good deeds of our followers. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of Imam al-Zaman. The next few nights, brothers and sisters, will be nights directly attributed to the Imam of our time. Laylatul Qadr, Imam al-Sadiq says, جادلوهم بإنا أنزلناه في ليلة القدر. These nights are very special nights. It's when the angels of Allah descend upon the heart of Imam al-Zaman. Let us make sure that we give charity for the safety of Imam al-Zaman, and we also remember him and pray for him. Pray for him, not just his return. His return is great for us, but praying for the Imam himself, praying for the safety of the Imam himself, inshallah. May Allah hasten his reappearance. May Allah make us, all of us, and our children, and our children's children, among the followers and partisans and fellows of Imam al-Zaman, among those who follow in his footsteps and obey his commands and avoid his injunctions, inshallah. Let's recite Dua al-Faraj as well as Amman Yujib, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. اكشف عنا السوء يا الله، عجل اللهم لوليك الفرج، اجعلنا من أصحابه وأعوانه ومقوية سلطانه. اللهم تقبل منا أعمالنا، اغفر لنا ذنوبنا، كفر عنا سيئاتنا، احفظنا وارحمنا وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات ومن مات على ولاية أمير المؤمنين والشهداء والعلماء والصالحين نهدي لهم ثواب مجلسنا وثواب سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.